Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We're a certified social enterprise, which means that we exist to make an impact, not to make a profit. Our purpose is to help reform the financial services industry so that it does a better job of actually serving and supporting society rather than exploiting it. We are here today, of course, for one of the Violation Tracker UK launch briefings. This is launch briefing number 8. And the nuance today, the focus today is on the environment. Violation Tracker UK does an amazing job of capturing details about environmental infringements by corporates. We have a list of speakers, but there's also going to be ample time for Q&A and discussion. I guess the most important message from me is that the Violation Tracker UK database is a wonderful new research tool that we've all got access to, free of charge within normal usage limits. And like anything, it's only as good as how well you use it. So today's session is really all about just coaching everybody on what the database is, how it works, how to use it, how to access it, and so on. I really do hope you find it to be helpful and useful, and will get you on your journey of being able to use this database into the future. That's enough from me for now. I'm going to go straight to Greg. To you, please, Greg. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Good Jobs First would like to gratefully acknowledge the financial support of 3 funders who made this database and website possible: the Jaffe Charitable Trust, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, and the Riva and David Logan Foundation. Hats off also to Andy and the advisory committee that he chairs that's been guiding us and adding so much value and making this rollout so robust as we have been rolling it out since last month. And also to our academic advisor and project participant, Professor Raghunandan, who hopefully you'll hear from shortly when he joins us. We also want to acknowledge Anthony K. Bagley, our lead researcher based in the UK, who did a bang-up job with Phil. And with that, I'm going to introduce Phil Matera, our research director and the mastermind behind both the Violation Tracker US, which is now 6 years old, and Violation Tracker UK. Phil?
Thanks, Greg. So I'd like to start by giving a quick overview of Violation Tracker UK for those of you who have not had a chance to look at it yourself. So I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so Violation Tracker UK is the UK version of a US database called Violation Tracker, which has been in existence since 2015 and has now grown to about 500,000 different entries covering every federal and many state regulatory agencies. The UK database, is also a wide-ranging resource on corporate crime and misconduct. We've collected data from more than 40 regulators in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And all of our information relates to resolved cases, cases in which there was a finding that a company broke a rule or which a company entered into a settlement to resolve an allegation of that sort. And all of our data comes from official government sources. None of this is from reports or allegations or rumors. We've got more than 63,000 cases that we've collected, and they have total monetary penalties of over £12 billion. But particularly in the environmental area, there are a lot of cases without monetary penalties. And because there are so many, we decided to include those, unlike what we do in the US, where we only include cases with monetary penalties of at least a certain amount. We also aggregate the cases by parent companies, particularly larger publicly traded companies, and we've got more than 670 of those parents. And we tag each entry in the database with one of 6 broad categories. And you can see that in the environment, we've got almost 6,000 cases. It's not the largest. Safety is the largest, mainly because workplace safety we treat separately from the environment. So the HSE has the largest number of cases, and then actually in the employment area, mainly cases from the employment tribunal account for a very large number. We've got several ways of searching the information in Violation Tracker UK. You could do a simple search where you plug in the company name by itself or in combination with one of those 6 offense groups, or perhaps also with the name of the regulatory agency. We also have a page where we've assembled a number of kind of pre-formatted summaries showing you, for example, all the violations relating to each one of those 670 parents, for each one of the industries in which those parents operate, each one of the 6 offense groups, each one of the agencies, and also each one of the countries where the parents are located. And finally, we have an advanced search page where you can mix and match those variables and others to create a custom search. So for example, here's an example of an individual entry for Barclays Bank. In this case, the bank paid a monetary penalty of £284 million for a foreign exchange market manipulation case. And we've got a narrative account of the case there. And at the bottom, there's a link to the source that we used for this. And in this instance, it was a press release issued by the Financial Conduct Authority. Oops, this is a better version of that same individual entry. I have here a summary of the parents with the largest monetary penalty totals for environmental cases. And if you look down the list at on the left, you'll see a lot of the privatized water services. And for example, Southern Water, Thames Water, etc. They account for a very large number both of cases and of monetary penalties. And here's a breakdown by the different environmental agencies. Of course, the Environment Agency has the largest number of cases and the largest penalty totals. Those are monetary totals in the right, but still, compared to some other agencies, those totals are really not, particularly compared to the financial totals, those totals are really quite modest. And that in part is because of what I mentioned before, that the Environment Agency is making much more use of these cautions or notices in which companies are not hit with a monetary penalty. And even in some cases, where there is a monetary penalty, it's not technically a fine. It's these things called environmental undertakings, where companies agree to contribute a certain amount of money to an NGO or an environmental project in lieu of paying a fine. This is a policy decision in the UK to move away from fines, which I think at least merits some debate. The question is it having an adequate deterrent effect? The answer may very well be no. So I think I will leave it there and be happy to answer any questions you may have and look forward to your comments.
Phil, thank you very much indeed. Could I invite you, please, Phil, if you wish, to just talk about the process that you and your team go through to actually get the data into the database? I'm really keen that everybody understands just how much work has been going on to make this all possible for us.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, all of our information comes from the regulatory agencies themselves, and we prefer to get it from their website so that we can include a link back to an official source. Now, those, unfortunately, the different regulators do not post their information in a consistent way. So we have to work with whatever format they use. When we are lucky, an agency will have a data set that we can easily download and incorporate in our in Violation Tracker UK. In some cases, we have to write code, computer code that goes in, for example, with HSE, go in and actually do automatic searches on their search engine to retrieve every individual case. And in other instances, we just have to look through large numbers of individual documents and find the ones that are relevant, and then extract the bits of information that we need for our entries and insert them in a spreadsheet and continue our processing that way. So as you can imagine, this is a very labor-intensive process. And also our parent subsidiary matching is also is not automated. I mean, we do have a computer program that suggests matches, but it's not, it's not 100% accurate. So we verify all those matches manually. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, and that's one of the reasons why, we're not able to update the database, every day or even every week. Our hope is to do it on a quarterly basis.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. We're going to go to Anish, then to Anne-Marie, then to Peter, then to Monica, then to Peter. Before we go to Anish, we have a lovely group here with us today. So I'm going to click to gallery view so I can see you all. Just wave a hand if you have a comment or a question that you'd like to interject with at this time, if you do. Otherwise, we'll go straight to Dr. Randan. Anish, to you, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to speak. So I guess who am I and what do I do? So I'm Dr. Anish Raghunandan. I'm a faculty member at the LSE, and I do a lot of work using Violation Tracker, kind of in two broad areas. The first is trying to understand which companies are up to no good and what the incentives are that underlie this. It's sort of taken from a perspective that companies aren't just inherently evil. There's something, there are financial stimuli, there are sort of incentives that then lead to rule breaking. And my goal is to try to understand what these incentives are and how they tie into rule breaking. And Violation Tracker is, of course, essential for that, and that it provides a source of hard information on what companies are actually up to, rather than some of these softer measures of corporate conduct that I'll get to in just a moment. And of course, the environment is a big component of this, right? Part of what I'm interested in is companies' commitments to environmental targets, commitments to reducing carbon emissions, and whether or not they actually do this. And the other area in which I work, which is closely related to all of this, is ESG investing, and relatedly trying to figure out whether those who are kind of uniquely placed to put a lot of pressure on companies for their environmental performance, namely ESG-oriented investors, are actually doing so. And so I'll give you an example of some of my work, and I'm happy to talk offline about other related stuff. But one thing that I found Violation Tracker really useful for is, as many of us might be aware, ESG-oriented investing is a big deal these days, right? If you open up the FT or any sort of major newspaper, you'll see something on probably almost every day about ethical investing, how it's taking off, what's up in the ethical investing space, and so on. What you don't necessarily see, what you haven't seen a lot of until very recently, is trying to understand whether these funds are actually leading to any meaningful changes in firms' environmental performance. And that's something where we can really rely on Violation Tracker in conjunction with some other data on like carbon emissions. And unfortunately conclude the answer is largely no, at least thus far, right? And so if you look at commercial ratings of which companies are green or which companies are sustainable, right? If you look at these commercial ESG ratings, you will find a correlation between the companies rated as green by these data providers and who's which companies are labeled to be ethical and held by these green investment funds. But the problem is that a lot of the data that people have historically used to figure out which companies are behaving sustainably and which ones are not rely on companies' voluntary disclosures, right? The company just says, oh, we're doing good things. And these rating agencies largely take them at their word. What Violation Tracker does, and the real innovation of Violation Tracker is, again, this is research done in the US, but the insights hold in the UK as well. What Violation Tracker really does is it brings hard information to the problem, right? And it helps you conclude that the answer is, hey, no, actually, these guys aren't putting their money where their mouth is, right? These guys aren't actually investing in ethical funds. And of course, this is research done in the US, but we see something broadly similar in the UK. There's almost no correlation between commercial ESG ratings here, commercial sustainability ratings, and companies' actual sustainability practices, right? There's no correlation between ESG ratings and environmental violations, and not much of a correlation between ESG ratings and emissions. So the punchline here is really to understand who's up to no good in a sustainability sense, and which firms actually seem to be doing okay in terms of their sustainability goals, in terms of their sustainability outcomes. Right? Violation Tracker provides the best source of objective, hard information, not the sort of soft information that's subject to reporting bias. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk about any of this offline. I am teaching today, so I'm gonna have to drop off somewhat early. But I'm happy to take any questions offline, either, sort of during the call in the next few minutes or just by email.
Anish, thank you very much indeed. That's a very powerful message. I mean, here we have data that shows that there's no real correlation between the claims being made by companies around the ESG credentials and reality. That's a pretty bold set of statements to make, and it really does speak to the idea that, my goodness me, there does seem to be a great deal of greenwashing in the system, as we have all suspected for some time. Big problem, and hopefully Violation Tracker can shine a light on that issue. Before we move on to the next stage, again, I want to just check in with everybody. Please just wave a hand at me if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment at this point. We're doing good for time. We'll go to Mr. Scott Housley. Scott, please take a moment, Scott, to introduce yourself. Nice to see you, Scott, and share your thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Housley, retired mainly from the financial services, and I missed the financial services session of this, for which my apologies, hence being on the environment. Quick question, does Violation Tracker only record on the database when a fine has been imposed?
I can, I'll follow Phil on that one. Go, Phil, yeah.
So we record all cases of infringements, and some of those infringements have fines and some of them don't. And some of them have different, and we call them penalties, and those penalties may include fines. They may include these things called environmental undertakings that the Environment Agency often uses, in which the company, in lieu of paying a fine to the agency, essentially makes a contribution to an environmental NGO. So if there's any kind of penalty, any kind of finding of wrongdoing by the agency, we record that, whether or not there's a monetary penalty, and regardless of what form that payment takes. Okay,
just a bit of a follow-on from that. In regard to the environment, there's been a number of articles in the UK press recently about raw sewage going into rivers and sea, this sort of thing. I'm not sure whether those reports that are in the papers come from the Environment Agency, or whether it's reports from people that have been picked up by the press. And if it is the latter, would those be recorded on the database? Or is it purely anything that's recorded by in that case, the Environment Agency?
Well, we would only record it if there was an action by one of the regulatory agencies.
Yeah.
And I should mention that there is, in addition to the agencies that I listed on that slide, there is the Water Services Regulator, which is kind of a hybrid regulator. It's kind of part consumer protection, but they also do some work that can be considered environmental. So we do have cases from that. I think their acronym is OFWAT.
Yeah.
Where
Yes,
we have
yeah.
cases from that agency that are included in Violation Tracker UK, but they might not be listed as environmental cases. And I know there have been some very large cases that they brought about these kind of leakages. You know, I mean, some of them are maybe sewage cases, some of them may be, you know, just leakages of, you know, of clean water. But one way or another, we capture them. But if it's just a case where there was an accident or you know, some other incident and the agency has not taken action or not yet taken action, it would not yet show up in the database.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Scott. If I may, I'm going to develop some of the points that have just been spoken about. So I'm going to share my screen and just talk to a couple of what I think are quite important points, if I can. So one of the most important things that we all do, if we can please, is to work together to try to raise awareness of the database. So it's obvious that here we've got a wonderful public good that we can all use free of charge, unless you're using, you know, masses and masses of data. But for ordinary folk, it's completely free to use. And one of the most important things we can all do is to help raise awareness of it. So please, everybody, do think of yourselves as, you know, participants in this journey in relation to Violation Tracker UK. Please don't think of yourselves as just passive users of it. Actually, you know, get stuck in and do what you can to raise awareness. We're very, very pleased to report that there's already been some remarkably good coverage about Violation Tracker. Here's a piece about, as you can see, Britain's bankers to be put into the spotlight with new Violation Tracker, but will it change behaviour? It's a very relevant question there. And a haven for dirty money. Nearly half of all corporate violations in the past decade are committed by the financial sector. Another one from Byline Times, which is what made me think about sharing this particular slide with you all, is following on from Scott's question. Water companies have paid nearly $500 million in fines for a decade of violations. And what I'll do, I'll put the links to each of these articles in the chat, so you can go and have a read of them. And I think, Scott, from what your question just now, you'll find that particular one very, very interesting indeed. One here about COVID. Big COVID management consultancy winners fined £101 million since 2010. There's quite a bit of upset in the UK around just you know, where's all that government money gone and why has it gone where it's gone. Another one here, 1/5 of elite conservative donors run firms penalised for corporate infringements. And all of these articles are driven by, or the data engine behind them is all Violation Tracker UK. And here's the one that I really wanted to get to, because I think this speaks to what today's session is all about. It was published in The Independent by Chris Blackhurst. Chris is pretty well known to one of the supporters of Violation Tracker, Brian Basham. And as you can see, the article is "The Hard Truth is Bankers Hold Sway for Net Zero Success." And this came out during COP26. And the article is basically about the idea that banks and major financial institutions are, you know, really very, very well placed to actually influence where the world's capital flows go. And it basically just speaks to the idea that that it's important that we actually have money going into the system where it should be going and not where it shouldn't be going. And the final thing I'll show before we go to Anne-Marie is, again, I'm going to share my screen if I may, to the right slide. Can you see the Violation Tracker webpage there? I hope you can. Is that what you're looking at? Violation Tracker webpage? I think you are. Let me just double check. Share screen, share Violation Tracker webpage. I just want to show how easy it is to get to the information that you want. So once you get to the webpage, which is obviously just a click on a link, you can go into, for example, offence group, This is where the big groupings are. And if you want to find the environment related offences, you literally just click on environment related offences. And then within a few seconds after you've clicked search, you are immediately taken to this absolute treasure chest of data that would otherwise be such hard work to collate. You know, all the hard work has been done for us by the database, which is fantastic. And it lists, as you can see, the top 10 parent companies, as was being mentioned by Greg. And one of the worrying things you get through understanding the data in the database is an understanding of how just recidivist organizations are. And what I mean by that is the same organizations being caught for doing the same things over and over again. Look how often companies like Thames Water and Southern Water are coming up, and Severn Trent Water. And you really have to wonder whether the environmental violations strategy is effective. And I say that for a particular reason here, because when you get to the bottom of this page, this very, very long page, you realize actually that's not the only page. There are loads of them, loads of pages. And if you click onto the far right-hand arrow, as I'm doing now, you'll see, look at the right-hand side. All of these organizations have done something to harm the planet. They've done something to harm the environment, but they haven't been fined. And I just cannot get my head around that. Phil made the point so well earlier. You know, how can we be sure we're really being as effective in terms of deterring bad behavior if so many organizations are just getting a little sort of a polite slap on the wrists, don't be a naughty boy again? Which surely we must be at a point now in society where we're recognizing that, you know, the planet is sacred and we need to protect it. So I'm sure that a lot of us within the TTF and other campaign organizations will want to be saying to the environmental agencies, for goodness sake, maybe you ought to change your approach to telling people off for polluting our rivers and all that kind of stuff. Rant over. I'll go to gallery view and just invite everybody who would like to wave their hand to come at this stage if you'd like to say anything else.
Well, while we're waiting, Andy,
yeah,
I just wanted to acknowledge someone else I just noticed who's on the call, Alex Barley-Winter, who was one of our researchers during the collection process, and we want to thank her for her work.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. That's lovely. And
thanks very much.
I noticed that Kim put her hand up. She waved it, and then we'll go to Jacqueline, who's put her hand up digitally. But Kim, to you first of all, please do take a moment, Kim, to introduce yourself first. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm Kim Schweitzer. I'm an ambassador and volunteer for Transparency Task Force, founder of Time for Change London. I had a really quick question about the ESG ratings because Anisha's work looked at the correlation there. Do we have ESG ratings for every organization that has a violation that's included in Violation Tracker, or is it just associated with the ones related to the environment?
One for Anish.
Yeah, so I can take that. So the ESG rating, there's a couple of things with ESG ratings, right? One is, of course, they tend to only exist for larger public companies. And of course, they've been getting, the coverage has been increasing dramatically, but by and large, pretty much all of my work on ESG scores and in general, it reflects public companies just because that's where the data exists. So I'd say for most public companies that have violations, there should also be an ESG score, but for private companies, that's not going to be true. Second thing, of course, is there are, of course, ESG scores along multiple dimensions. And one thing I didn't really clarify is that you can actually look at the so-called like environmental or sustainability score specifically, and even there's like no correlation. And that's something I didn't really highlight. But I mean, the hardest thing in all of this is like trying to understand the behavior of private companies because there's just less data out there. In that sense, Violation Tracker does also serve as a valuable resource to figure out what private companies are up to, because no one's really watching in terms of, you know, they don't get as much media coverage. They don't get as much, they're not typically covered by any of the big information intermediaries just because you can't trade their shares. And yet it's still worth knowing what they're up to. And Admittedly, we don't have parent company information in Violation Tracker, but we have their violations when they exist. So,
I just want to clarify that the ESG scores are not in Violation Tracker UK. Those are things that Anish is consulting and elsewhere. In the database, we simply have the violations, the regulatory infringements.
Thank you very much indeed.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Anish. And let's go to Jacqueline. Jacqueline.
Hi, yes, Jacqueline Hill. I make my business out of being a leadership coach and change transfer, but I'm an ambassador for TTF and really just a layperson trying to do the right thing. But I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn, and it strikes me that if you've not already come across it or got a partnership with them, there's a Blue Map app. Was part of one of the finalists for the Earthshot Prize here in the UK, and it maps out violators of environmental things. So it's predominantly, I think, Chinese factories chucking out stuff. And what the Blue Map app does is tell individuals who have the app, members of the public, naming and shaming where those are. So you can look in your local area at who's polluting my local area and take action. And it just struck me that if I was alerted to a violation in the river near me, I might be more galvanized to act. And so I think there's potential for at least having a look at the Blue Map app and seeing if there's a way of joining up with that.
Wow, what a great idea. Jacqueline, would you mind doing a Google search and trying to find a link to some information on that and whacking it in the chat for us?
Yes, I can do that, and I've done that, but I've also connected Phil. I've put a link in on a post in LinkedIn, which hopefully, because I've added you, will get to you. But if it doesn't, give me a shout. But I will do that. Yeah.
Jacqueline, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. What a great idea. What an absolute great idea. We've got Nigel Keynes as next. Nigel, lovely to see you again. It's great to have your enthusiasm for this project. It really is, Nigel. To you, sir. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
My question arises out of your comments made a few minutes ago about the water companies.
Yeah.
The particular regulators of the water companies are obviously dishing out all sorts of admonishments and non-financial fines. And I'm wondering, do they have the legal powers to make those financial penalties? If so, do we know to what degree that they are capable of making those fines? And if they have a legal right to do so, do they have a duty in any way to administer those fines? Do we have any further knowledge on that?
Well,
Phil, I mean, I would assume, I mean, are you talking about the Environment Agency?
Yes, and you suggested that there are other agencies that are involved also with the water companies and others. I'm just wondering if some or all of them would have the legally enforceable powers to make the financial fines.
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, in fact, you know, you could argue that the water services are more heavily regulated, at least in terms of how frequently they are cited and fined, than many other industries. In fact, I was surprised when we were gathering the data that to what extent the water companies, you know, account for the fines that are imposed. I'm actually more concerned about other industries which are not showing up as much in the violation data, and I wonder whether they're being ignored by the regulators. And I can't believe they're all acting, you know, perfectly, and that they're not, you know, causing any kind of environmental problems.
I agree. Surely there's a case that these regulators are being negligent themselves in not using the powers if they have them.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly the Environment Agency has made a decision to move away from fines for all industries, and I think that these environmental undertakings, you know, better than nothing, are not doing enough to deter companies from future, environmental infractions. And this is, I mean, I don't have in-depth knowledge of the policy making procedures of all the 40 agencies that we're covering in the database, but it just seems based on the enforcement data that there has been a decision to move away from using these tools. And I would hope that those of you there who are working in this area would question this decision.
I think
I think these facts are made frighteningly obvious by the presentation style of Violation Tracker, and hopefully this will galvanise much more interest, public interest, in focusing on this matter.
We actually have a training session tomorrow for regulators and have a couple of offices at least committed to sending people. It'll be at 2 hours later than this starting time today was. And certainly everybody's free to attend that session. You can find the link on the TTF website to goad the regulators to act on this new silver platter of data we're handing them.
Totally agreed. There's got to be some logic to it. It's a bit like parenting children. If you don't tell them off the little stuff, they'll go on and do little stuff, and then they'll go and do bad stuff. If you just let them off the little stuff, it's just inviting them to carry on doing it. I think there's a lot of logic in what Nigel and Phil have been saying. There really is. So maybe one of the big outcomes from Violation Tracker UK in its very first iteration is some well-posed questions by parliamentarians and others to the regulators about the strategy behind, tellings off rather than proper fines. Surely there's a debate to be had there in the Commons. But before we go to Anne-Marie and Peter, both of whom I know have got their hand up, but they're also going to be speaking shortly anyway, I just want to check in if anybody else would like to ask a question or make a comment before we go to Anne-Marie or Peter. In which case, let's go straight to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, lovely to see you again. Please do take a moment to introduce yourself and share your thoughts about Violation Tracker UK. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much. It's extremely exciting, and the more I come to these meetings, and the more exciting I find them. So yes, thank you to all of you. I graduated in business law and maritime law, and then I turned to performing arts. But I'm now back with looking at the environment, looking at teaching, looking at having workshops, especially for young people. And I'm an ocean preservation tutor and speaker. What I wanted to say today, and it fits in with what the conversation was about just now, this greenwashing is quite frightening in a way, because it's almost as if it's a blanket. So we can't really see exactly what the effect and the recidivists are all over the place. There's no doubt about it. It's difficult. But from that point of view, and what I wanted to say was, we are looking at some changes which are imminent, and that has to do with the ecocide law. And we have at the moment, since June, legal experts from across the world have drawn a historic definition of ecocide, and they intend to have it adopted by the International Criminal Court. So I think very soon we will see some changes. And I think that might just make things a bit easier. As far as definitely Violation Tracker goes, we will have a lot more information, very precise. So my feeling about Violation Tracker is that the timing is amazing. It's impeccable. We've just come out of COP26. We know how important it is. We see economics sort of putting, we're looking at different ways of the concept of economics. So spotlighting the penalties for crimes against nature and ecocide works alongside so many of the changes we are actually seeing at the moment. So there's no doubt that we have ways to do better and to run companies in a way that is aligned with the common good. So this is where Violation Tracker is just so important. It's important for organizations, it's important for the individual, it's important for students to really have a look at. I'm very keen on education as well. And I would love the violation tracker to be actually brought forward so our young students actually see how it works and what can be done, because they will be our resources for the future. There's no doubt about it. There's one case I wanted just to actually bring to your attention. If you haven't seen it, it's called the Uganda case. I'll try and put a link. And this is what happens. And that's between 2015 and 2020. 900 Dutch citizens, teachers, entrepreneurs, parents, students, united to sue their government for its inaction on climate change. Now, this is a mega event, because if this catches on, we're looking at governments being accountable and every section of the government being accountable. The court actually ruled in 2020 in their favor. It has been confirmed again. And what the penalties are, I can't actually find, but the decision was that reduce emissions by 25% within the 5 years to protect citizens from climate change effects. So we're looking at the notion that climate change has become a human rights issue. From that point of view, that's a big, big change. And I think we're going to see that reflected in all sorts of things, in all sorts of areas. And from Violation Tracker, it might just make your job a little bit easier. I'm not saying a lot, but maybe you'll get some more information. So basically, it's what I wanted to say is watch this space. It's actually looking very positive as far as the environment is concerned. It takes time, but it's looking positive. So in relation to Violation Tracker, my conclusion is that it's a welcome wake-up call. And if the financial sector and business sector means to be trusted, it needs to listen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. You've made some very, very powerful points extremely well. Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Let's go straight now to Monica, then we'll go to Peter. And then I'm going to pick Lord Tunnell's brains, if he doesn't mind. Let's go to Monica. Monica, to you, please. Thank you.
Hi, so thank you for inviting me and being here. My name is Monica Trzaska, and I'm a faculty academic member at the University of Exeter Business School. So from an academic point, the data that you guys collected for the US and for the UK are extremely useful, because they basically allow us to do our job in terms of looking at various links between the firm characteristics and the violations that firm do. So we can look. We already have a couple of papers on the US data, and we are basically looking whether the CEO risk characteristics in any way affect the workplace misconduct committed by the firms. In another paper, we are actually looking whether having government as a major customer might affect wage and hour violations. So we actually find that due to government oversight and monitoring, because of the procedures they apply in the acquisition process, they actually have a meaningful impact. It's like a byproduct of their acquisition procedures. So in a really meaningful way, it can change our recommendations in terms of what can actually change the companies to affect the way they behave. We can look either at and because of so many categories that we have, we can look at the workplace violations, we can look at environmental violations, and make some recommendations based on our research. So for us, it's like really powerful tool in terms of it increased massively the transparency of the data that was out there, but not readily available for the analysis. And also, actually, Anesh at the beginning made great points about the ESG ratings. So as you all know, we kind of try to figure out whether the companies are really doing good or whether it's just the greenwashing that is put out there. And I was recently also looking into ESG ratings, and there are many of them. They are collected by the investment advisors and some investment companies. And the problem with those ratings is that the data is biased. There is it's discretionary what the companies actually disclose. It's collected also in some subjective way by various companies, and some papers, like academic papers that did research on those ratings, they found even no correlation among them. We would expect that there should be at least some, but there is none. And like also Anesh said, there is even no correlation between those ratings and the actual actions the companies take. So the violation tracker kind of helps us to solve at least some of the issues with the data that is available out there. So yeah, I'm happy to talk any further about those issues if you want offline. But yeah, due to time constraints, I suppose I will wrap up.
Monica, thank you so much. You really have already done some great analysis with your colleagues using Violation Tracker US data. I'm sure there's going to be loads coming out from you and your colleagues using Violation Tracker UK too. Monica, please don't hesitate if you wish to put some links in the chat to the work that you've done. It would be great for everybody to have access to that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Wonderful to get all this great goodwill and support from everybody that's using Violation Tracker already. Let's now go to Peter. Peter, please do take time to introduce yourself. You're a man with many hats, and I would like everybody to know the extent of the perspectives that you have, and frankly, the relevance of your background and your credibility, if I can put it that way, for Violation Tracker UK, particularly in relation to matters around sustainability and the environment. Peter, over to you. Looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'll pick up a few of the things that have been said. Yeah, Peter Young. So I've had lots of independent roles, as Andy says, an important ambassador for TTF, and I'm very, very enthusiastic about the arrival of Violation Tracker here in the UK, and I'm particularly keen to see it applied by third sectors, interested parties, and regulators to really up our game in terms of environmental protection. I would go as far as saying our actual environmental regulation system is currently pretty broken, and ironically we're just at the stage where we enacted exactly a month ago on the 1st of November our new environment bill. There are a lot more responsibilities that are within that, and they will flow through into further regulations, which means there'll be even more for our environmental regulators to look after on our behalf. Yet they're very well ill prepared for that. I co-founded a couple of environmental NGOs, Aldersgate Group and Broadway Initiative, which look very much at this area. I just wanted to share a few thoughts of some of the things that have been said as to why you see these strange things in the data and why it's so powerful and I'm really pleased to see some researchers here who are actually already mining into this data, because it is about producing credible, peer-reviewed papers and evidence from this database that I think will actually move the dial. We've got in a situation where, taking the Environment Agency, their prime purpose is to look after the environment. One of the things that has been shown by government after government since they were formed is if they bring to court and get fines, those fines go to government and have no bearing on their own resources. So we're at the stage where they're about to get a whole load of extra requirements under the Environment Act, but actually they are in the middle of a negotiation of probably reducing their funding further, and they've been on a contracting path for some time. That reduces their capacity to do the regulation they should be doing on our behalf. But in addition, because of their unarm's length status. They've got an arm's length status, but it's not sufficiently arm's length. And this is the big debate going on with the so-called Office of Environmental Protection. And I particularly wanted to highlight, if people haven't heard that, this is the new body being created by the Environment Act. And that body is a very good place to go with the kind of complaints that we might arise using Violation Tracker. And I particularly, that they've just appointed their board now, so we know who they are, we know who to go to, and I think they would be someone who might call this out on our behalf, because the size of the fines just do not relate. But one of the reasons why we've got these environmental undertakings is actually to achieve environmental outputs. Just fining companies money gets the Environment Agency nowhere. Asking companies to do environmental good, to repair to some degree the damage they've done, does get them some environmental. So that's where the motivation of the Environment Agency is to do that. Unfortunately, if you look at the water companies, most of the big violations relate from a lack of investment. And a lack of investment is big money, and it's money decisions that are made as to whether or not that investment takes place. And this links across to what we've also heard about with ESG ratings, that because ESG ratings at the moment fail to make any connection, you'll find all of the green ratings putting water companies way up the list. You know, if you go and ask your pension to go into green funds, I can guarantee you that a good chunk of it will go into water companies, because water companies have very good green glossy environmental reports, but they're also responsible for a large proportion of the pollution, which means that 97% of our fresh waters do not meet good or excellent quality. And that is a real indictment of the inefficiency of what we've got at the moment. So I just sort of throw out a few of those things. I wanted to comment about a couple of things. One, to give the support to Violation Tracker, and indeed, you know, very well welcome the backers, but maybe get more backers on board so we can spread it. One of the other policy decisions of past governments has been to distribute environmental responsibilities among as many different regulating organisations as possible, making it even harder to work out who is actually violating. So, for example, a lot of environmental at a local level responsibilities are with local authorities, and I would say local authorities have pretty well abrogated that responsibility in recent years due to their own funding cuts. So, for example, fly tipping is a huge problem, and if you are a serial criminal, and there are a lot of them based in London particularly, who take your waste away, they take a skip away, they take 100 quid off you to take a skip away, and they'll go and dump it in a hedgerow, and they just dump in a different hedgerow in a different local authority each time. They're pretty well immune from getting caught, unless they're literally caught red-handed, because local authorities don't have the capacity to go around and deal with that, and each local authority is working pretty well independently. So that's just one example. There's a whole load of other responsibilities which were put down there. And then another issue I just wanted to raise is changing the nature of some of these powers for regulation. The Environment Agency has got permission to move up to higher fines, and that's why you see the water companies there, because of the decades of ineffectiveness of their regulatory activity. And it is beginning to move the dial, but very early days. Look at Southern Water up the top there. Southern Water now owned by Macquarie. They previously had a period owning Thames, where they asset stripped them to some degree, took out a load of capital which should have been spent on environmental improvement, and Thames carried on polluting the Thames and its catchment. So we've got a long history of getting that wrong, but at least they were able to raise the value. Other areas, we don't even have that kind of value available. All of the nature-based violations are minute. You'll find them right at the bottom. I had a look, and they're right at the bottom. Those last pages Andy was showing us, that's the only place you'll see nature violations, because the fines are absolutely trivial and the reputational damage is negligible. The big difference we can all make is bringing reputational damage. And just a last comment, which I'll stick in the thing so you have is another one of these diversified regulators is, I bet you've never heard of this one, the Groceries Code Adjudicator. Anyone heard of the Groceries Code Adjudicator? Right, well, they have massive powers. They could be quite a secret weapon. They were put into place principally to do with the issue of the large supermarkets completely screwing their suppliers. and also the concomitant damage to environment and welfare standards that was creating. But they have powers to actually fine, which in percentage terms of turnover. So if you go to Tesco and you say, oh, I can give you a fine of 1 or 2% turnover, suddenly Tesco is turning up at all of their hearings and making sure that they sort things out. So it's about making sure that the penalties are proportionate to the damage. And we all know that at the moment, as far as environment and nature is concerned, we've underpriced the value that has massively, and all of our historical regulatory requirements have that massive reduction. Probably gone on too long. Sorry, Andy.
You haven't gone on too long at all. As always, your points are so impactful, Peter. Thank you so much. And I'm repeating what I said earlier, I know, but your enthusiastic support for Violation Tracker since the whole project began has been really wonderful, as has been for various other folks as well. Thank you, Peter. That's brilliant. I hope he doesn't mind, but I'm going to invite Lord Andrew Stunnell to allow me to pick his brains just for a moment. Lord Stunnell, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself, and just, if you don't mind, share any thoughts you have about how we might be able to raise awareness of Violation Tracker UK within Parliament, perhaps amongst your Liberal Democrat colleagues and so on. Any thoughts about that, or indeed anything else, Andrew, if you'd like to speak? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Andy, and thank you even more for giving me a little bit of a warning that you were going to come to me. No, I'm very happy to, well, first of all, to support Violation Tracker, and it's it's a tool with a great deal of potential for making some changes. And I mean, in an open political system that we have in the UK, most change of this kind only comes when a lot of people think simultaneously it's a good idea to have it. The people on this call are all absolutely desperately committed, but you are a very small fraction of the population of the United Kingdom, indeed not even of the United Kingdom in some cases. So I think this transparency point is really a crucial one, that is what this brings, you know, what does this bring to the table? It brings transparency, and I think that's really important. And I spend quite a lot of my time in the political sphere talking to my political colleagues and saying, just remember, we are not normal people. And normal people actually only pay attention to these kind of issues, or any kind of change society issues, infrequently, and they only do so when it's something that they can really latch onto. So this is really a good starting point, I think, for tackling this. I just wanted to pick up some of the points being made about fines versus environmental undertakings. And I think Peter did actually sketch in some of the thinking that there is there, that if you want to stop a company simply saying 90 million quid, no problem, here you are, and just carry on, then substituting environmental undertakings, which are enforceable in the courts, is something which is a reasonable alternative, or maybe it should be a mixture of both. So I don't think you should completely dismiss the idea that getting environmental undertakings is a soft option for a company. And it comes back, as Peter again said, to money. I mean, it genuinely is cheaper to pay the fines, because the cost of putting in the infrastructure to stop, for instance, sewage pollution in rivers and seas is considerable, and probably a lot more than the fines, actually. So making sure that they are committed to a timetable to put those things right, which is enforceable, is not a trivial thing, and we shouldn't completely dismiss it. In fact, I would think Violation Tracker ought not to worry too much about whether it's fines or environmental undertakings. We just need to see some progress. At the moment, there's too much going on that doesn't even get a fine or an environmental undertaking imposed on the violator. So that will be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, I mean, dissing somebody there, I'm very sorry, but I think I may be. The Liberal Democrats are the third party in English politics, and we are in opposition to the current government. And the current government has a deregulatory approach to many things. I mean, it openly says that it wants less regulation. It wants people to be free to exercise their rights and privileges as they think fit. And of course, that does tend to favor large organizations and rich people. And we've been a critic in both houses of Parliament of them. And it was indeed the Liberal Democrats in the House of Lords who moved a large number of the amendments to the Environment Act, some of which were accepted by the government and some of which have not been accepted by the government, which was designed to improve that situation, or if you like, to reverse the trend. Again, I think that, if you like, the force is with you as far as getting the government to move on the regulatory question, because it is quite anxious to project itself as a global leader on COP26, for instance. But don't also forget that we've got COP15 on biodiversity coming in the spring to be held in China. And don't forget either that the UK is officially the chair of COP26 for the next 12 months. So they have some reputational damage that they have to avoid as well. And so the more noise there is about these issues, and the more that I and fellow parliamentarians can ask awkward questions, but also, I mean, I don't know what your links are to the environmental journalists in the media are, but I would strongly suggest that you do your very best to pick them off, because you need a good sequence of exposures coming in the public prints and in the media to get that reinforcement of the embarrassment, if you like. It's the embarrassment factor, isn't it, that is going to be the winner here, to really kick in. Some things have been said about the regulators, and I suppose, especially if we have a longer term relationship, Andy, I ought to disclose that I have a relative who works in a fairly senior position in the Environment Agency, and I'm quite sure he would be quite willing to, not to appear in front of you, but I'm sure he would want to say that the Environment Agency does indeed have high standards it seeks to achieve, but as Peter said, it is subject to shrinking budgets, which means it has to prioritize. And so that is a factor in the work that it does. As far as the water companies go, the regulator, the other regulator that really matters is Ofwat, the Office of Water something or others. And Ofwat decides what their price structure should be. And there's been a consultation about, well, essentially about what can they add to their prices in the next price cycle to pay for increased investment. And I know that I, as a parliamentarian, had a consultation to fill in from my local water company, which is United Utilities, to ask where I thought the balance should be between keeping prices low for consumers and putting prices up so that they could go at a faster pace on their investment program. They submitted that to Ofwat, and Ofwat is in the process of adjudicating on the amount of money that they are required or able to put on the infrastructure. So Ofwat are actually really important in this, because in relation to water companies, they decide how much of the tap can be turned on. Right. The companies cannot themselves actually say, we're going to put the prices up so that we can pay to deal with this sewage problem. They have to get it through the regulatory system. So it's interlinked in a way which isn't perhaps immediately obvious. I hope that's, I mean, those are my first thoughts. I don't know how useful they are, but I certainly think that as a project, this can easily get airborne and can easily be a useful lever to make things move on in the direction that we all want to see.
Fantastic. What great comments. Lord Stanley, thank you very much indeed. And I can't help resist mentioning that we had your former leader, Sir Vincent Cable, with us on a symposium yesterday evening. It was great to have him speaking at that as well. Thank you so much. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful input from everybody. I'm going to click onto gallery view so I can see you all. Please just wave if you'd like to make a point. Otherwise, we'll start bringing the session to a close. It looks like we can bring the session to a close. It's been a really, really enjoyable meeting to host. Thank you all very, very much indeed. But before we do anything else, I think it's absolutely appropriate for me to invite everybody to thank Greg and Anthony and Anish and Phil and Arlene and all the people involved with Violation Tracker in the US who've made Violation Tracker UK possible. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's like another great American brand finding its way across the Atlantic. So Violation Tracker UK follows Levi Jeans and Elvis Presley and Harley Davidson motorbikes and Coca-Cola. Can we please put our hands together to thank Greg and the team at Violation Tracker? Thank you very, very much indeed for giving us this wonderful public utility completely free to use. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Super stuff. We'll bring it to a close there, folks. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank
Cheerio.
you.
Bye-bye.